This is 10.2, day 2. We're talking about significance tests for a difference in means. So usually our notation is going to be mu1 minus mu2, but we could use whatever subscripts we want for these, whether it's the mean of the boys compared to the mean of the girls, or the mean of the sophomores compared to the mean of the seniors. Could be whatever context you want it to be. We're just going to compare two different means. And the null hypothesis is going to start off by saying that there's no difference between these two means. So we'll say mu1 minus mu2 equals 0. And then the alternative hypothesis could be greater than if mu1 is the bigger value, less than if mu2 is the bigger value, or we could just try to say that they're different with a not equal to sign. So let's start off with a couple of the key statistical components for this test. For starters, what is the standard error of x bar 1 minus x bar 2? So I'm going to use SE for our notation. That's just the square root of the sample standard deviation squared over their respective sample sizes, N1 and N2. So we'll need this to get our test statistic. The next piece there, is this on the formula sheet? And it actually is on the new AP formula sheet. They don't call it SE though. They just use lowercase s with the same subscripts. So we're using sample data for this value, the standard error. Right? We've got sample standard deviations. And just like when we did one sample t-test, the standard error is our best estimate for what the true population standard deviation might be. And then how might you interpret this value in context? Well, the quote I have here, you could say how far the sample difference, right, your sample means, how far the sample difference will typically fall from the true difference in means. And again, I'm talking about, when I say the true difference, I mean like our null hypothesis. So how far will our sample mean difference, if we subtract the x bars, how far will that typically fall from the true difference in means? And so we're going to need this standard error piece to make our formula for a two-sample t statistic. That's our t-test statistic. So we'll start off with t equals, it's going to be a big fraction. And this is just the difference in the sample data. So x bar 1 minus x bar 2, the difference in your sample means, compared to the difference in the true population means, which if we start out by assuming the null hypothesis is true, that will just be 0. So we've got our sample data compared to true population mean, what we think is true to start, divided by our standard error. So that is the complete formula for our two-sample t-test statistic. And again, this value for mu1 minus mu2 matches our null, so that's going to be 0. The next piece there, is it on the formula sheet? No, unfortunately not. The way this is expressed is not specifically on the formula sheet. They just have their generic version of what a test statistic is. And then what does this measure? So what does our t-score measure in this case? Well, it's just to get a sense of how many standard deviations, right, how many standard deviations away something is. Specifically, how many standard deviations our sample difference is from the null hypothesis, what we perceive to be true. And so the next part here just talks about the conditions for performing inference about comparing two means, mu1 and mu2. So we already know the big three for the most part. We need both samples to be random, so the data come from a random sample or an experiment. We need the independence condition to be met, which means not only are the two samples, sample 1 and sample 2, independent of each other, but we're not sampling more than 10% of their populations. So that's the 10% condition. And then lastly, we have something about normality, which the easiest way to prove that is if we have at least 30 in each sample. So if the sample size is at least 30 for both of these guys, then the central limit theorem right away verifies normality for us. But if the sample sizes aren't at least 30, we're not dead in the water. There's still sort of a way to skirt this rule, get around the central limit theorem. We just need to look at a graph of the sample data. So if we look at a graph of the sample data and we're not that offended by it, meaning there's no strong skew, a little bit of skew is okay, no strong skew and no outliers, we'll just make the bold assumption that the data would come from a parent that would be approximately normal. That's key. Let's put the approximately normal sign on here. There we go. All right, so we've got our conditions. It's the big three again: randomness, independence, and normality. Let's talk about the t distribution here. In particular, we know it's our test statistic is a t-score, but we need to figure out what the degrees of freedom will be. And the best way to do that really is to let your calculator do it. So use technology, and it has a little bit more of an elaborate, specific formula to figure out degrees of freedom. You'll notice it might even come out to a decimal value. But if you don't have a calculator and you're stuck, you just have to use the conservative estimate between the two samples. So best case scenario, use your calculator to figure out the degrees of freedom. If you don't have a calculator, the conservative approach would be to just pick the smaller of the two sample sizes and subtract 1. So whether that's the first sample size or the second sample size, you just got to pick the smaller of the two and do 1 less than that for your degrees of freedom. So hopefully you have your calculator, because that will be the preferred method here to figure out the degrees of freedom for our t-test statistic. It's going to have a larger degrees of freedom as opposed to just using the conservative estimate, and it's going to be a more precise value. Okay, so the next part here talks about why we use a t-statistic rather than a z-statistic. So if you still remember this, the truth is still the same, and it's because we don't know the population standard deviation. We don't know what sigma is, and we won't know what sigma is. We have to use the sample standard deviation. So we use the sample standard deviation, which we usually use little s to represent the sample standard deviation. So that's why we have to use t-scores here rather than z-scores. So in our formula for the standard error, instead of using sigmas in these spots, we have to use the sample standard deviations, so just little s. And we know there's more variability, right? From sample to sample, you might get a different standard deviation. So since there's more variability, we use the t distribution to account for that. Remember, the t distribution has fatter tails, so t-scores are bigger than z-scores to account for that variability. And so the next piece here, how do you calculate the degrees of freedom? Well, you already know, I recommend to use technology, of course. And specifically when you use the two-sample t-test, I want to make sure that you're not doing the pooled options. So we're never going to do pooled for means. So we're going to use two-sample t-test. That'll give us the degrees of freedom and that precise value. But I want you to avoid the pooling option. So we'll never do pooled for means. We'll save the pooling for the proportions, not for means. So let's take a look at our one and only example for these notes about leaking helium. It says, after buying many helium balloons only to see them deflate within a couple of days, Aaron and Jenna decided to test if helium-filled balloons deflate faster than air-filled balloons. To find out, they bought 60 balloons of the same type and randomly divided them into 2 piles of 30, filling the balloons in the first pile with helium and the balloons in the second pile with air. Then they measured the circumference of each balloon immediately after being filled, and again 3 days later. The average decrease in circumference of the helium-filled balloons was 26.5 centimeters, with a standard deviation of 1.92 centimeters. The average decrease of the air-filled balloons was 2.1 centimeters, with a standard deviation of 2.79 centimeters. So part A asks, do these data provide convincing evidence that helium-filled balloons deflate faster than air-filled balloons? So that's our cue to do a hypothesis test. So the 4-step inference process: state, plan, do, conclude. So I'm going to put my little helium-filled balloon up in the corner, and let's start with the state step. So let's go ahead and get the hypotheses that we want to test. Our null hypothesis will be that there's no difference between the two means. In other words, the mean for the helium balloons would be equal to the mean for the air-filled balloons, which will always be the case for our null hypothesis when we're comparing two means. The alternative hypothesis, since we're trying to suggest that helium is the bigger value, we would say that this difference is greater than 0. And then let's go ahead and define what mu with an H subscript or mu with an A subscript represent in context. So these are the true mean decreases in the balloon circumference as measured in centimeters for helium and air, respectively. So we've got H for helium and A for air. And then don't forget to put our alpha level. Typically, we'll just use 0.05. All right, so that's it for the state step. On to the plan step. I'm going to put another balloon up here. So for starters, we need to be able to name the type of test we're going to run. So if conditions are met, we're going to do a 2-sample t-test. So when we're comparing two means, it's a 2-sample t-test. And remember, anytime we're doing inference for means, we'll always use t-scores. So let's go ahead and check those conditions. And although this is an experiment, we didn't randomly sample, we at least assigned the balloons to the treatments at random. So there was that aspect of randomness in our experiment. And then for the independence condition, since we didn't randomly sample from some larger population of balloons, the 10% condition wouldn't apply. The best we can do is just say, the results of one balloon shouldn't influence the results of another, being that this is just an experiment. And last but not least, let's talk about normality. Looks like we have just enough balloons in each group to apply the central limit theorem. So when we're talking about means, it's nice to have at least 30 in each group. So the central limit theorem will ensure normality for us. All right, we've got 3 check marks. We checked all 3 conditions. It's time for the do step. And since it's our 3rd step, we're on our 3rd balloon. With 2 things I need for this: the test statistic and the p-value. So I'll show the formula here, but in practice, it's better to just grab your calculator and find the right command. So the test statistic would be a t-score. We start with the difference in our sample means compared to what we expect in the population means. We expect that to be 0. That was our null hypothesis. Divided by the standard error of our sample means. Which would give us 39.46 for our t-score. And then we could use the tcdf command to graph and shade that t-score. The degrees of freedom, well, again, I always recommend using technology for this part. It'll give you the t-score and the p-value and the degrees of freedom, which is 51.4. So if you can find this command in your calculator, a two-sample t-test, then you won't have to go about this formula by hand or calculate the t-score by hand. The p-value it gets is approximately 0. I think it had 0.00041 zeros. So for all intents and purposes, the p-value in this case is approximately 0. Once again, it's nice to know these formulas, especially for multiple choice questions, but this calculator command gives us everything we need, t-score, p-value, and tells us the precise degrees of freedom used. All right, time for the fourth and final step. We've got 4 balloons here. The conclude step. So we've got an extremely small p-value. That's evidence to reject the null hypothesis, right? That's less than our alpha level. So we're going to reject the null hypothesis. And we have to say what that means in context. So if we reject the null, that means we have convincing evidence, in this case, very convincing evidence of the alternative, which would mean that helium-filled balloons definitely deflate more quickly than air-filled balloons. Or more formally, with the alternative hypothesis, that difference, mu h minus mu a, is greater than 0. That's the one that we support. All right, and the last bit of this note starts with, can you interpret the p-value you got in part A in the context of this study? And this is like the holy grail of AP stats, if you understand what a p-value gives you. And I always like to illustrate these. So I'm going to draw a curve. I'm going to put the null hypothesis in the middle. So we always start out assuming that the null hypothesis is true, right? It's like innocent until proven guilty. And again, I'm just trying to illustrate this p-value scenario to help us interpret that. So we put the null hypothesis in the middle. How rare would it be if 0 was the true difference to get sample data that had a difference in means of 24.4 centimeters? Or perhaps even more. So it would shade this little tiny area in the tail, but our p-value was effectively 0, right? There's almost nothing left in that tail because it's so far out here, so far away from the null hypothesis. Which also tells you, if this was the true case, this is almost impossible to happen just as a chance occurrence. So we can always use this drawing, this depiction, to help us interpret the null, starting with, we put the null in the middle. So assuming that the true mean decrease in the circumferences is actually 0, right? They're the same. It would be really rare, right? Almost never. The p-value is approximately 0. There's an approximately 0% chance of getting a sample difference of 24.4 or more, just as a random occurrence. Okay, and then the last note here, is it okay to use your calculator for the do step? Absolutely. I think I've emphasized that enough already. Definitely grab your calculator. You can use 2 sample t-tests when you're comparing or doing a test about 2 means. The only drawbacks, just make sure you say no if it asks you to pool for means. We only pool for proportions. All right, so we've talked about significance tests when we're comparing 2 means. That is all for these notes. I'll see you in class.